Hello, my friends, and welcome to Out in the Open, a show where artists get a chance to tell their story and dive into the creative process. In episode 2, our guest is Joshua Wentz. He's a producer, synth player, songwriter, and generally amazingly talented artist. He's put out a ton of electronic music as a solo artist, but also worked with musicians like Jessica Risker and my band, Under Moonlight. We met up in Chicago's Humboldt Park to talk about his new music project, Ronchamp. The album is based on his memory of visiting the famous Notre Dame Du Haut chapel in France. And with that, let's get into it.
So one thing I've always loved about your tracks is that there's a very strong sense of mood and vibe with every song I've heard. When I hear them, I can feel them on a very deep and visceral level. And I'm wondering, is that by design? Is that intentional? Do you start with a mood and then build the track based on that mood, or is it just kind of a byproduct where the mood comes out just as a natural, happenstance?
Yeah, I definitely would say I tend to start in a mood-based place. I think I'll usually improvise on the piano for a little bit, kind of find where I want to be, and then that improvisation tends to be what I'm feeling at the time, and I'll expand out from there. So yeah, definitely mood-based to start.
Yeah, and then do you ever start intentionally with this project? I guess the answer is yes. You do start with sometimes concept in mind, then build from that. Like with Ronchamp, this new record, you're starting with the concept and then kind of building based on your memory and your perception. Is this the first time you've done that, or is it something you've done in kind of projects past, or just songs past?
I definitely love having a concept. I kind of have to have some sort of framework for any project. Mm-hmm. But this one specifically is the first one where I've tried to really go deep into memory and try to recall feelings that I had in a specific time and place and kind of make that the point of the album.
Right.
But, it's kind of hard to just, you kind of probably know this too, when you want to dredge up a feeling, it's like, am I in the moment, or do I have to kind of put myself in that moment? And
it's a great question, because songs I struggle with this all the time, where songs in many ways are like a moment in time, and especially with me as a vocal kind of singer-songwriter, you write lyric ideas, you write concepts as you feel them, and maybe you just sketch them on notebooks or whatever you have, computer notes, but then you don't track the song or record it until weeks, months later, and that feeling may have dissipated or kind of faded. And so you have to figure out a way, especially as a singer, how do you get yourself back to that place emotionally so that you can record that performance and be true to how you felt in that moment. And it's I'm sure it's the same with synth too, or really any songwriter, musician, producer. You have to figure out how do you get back to that place so you can faithfully recreate that feeling.
Yeah, I think a lot of people might say, what do I want the people listening to this to be doing while they're listening to it? So, you don't want to make some sort of high octane EDM type song if you want people to be chilling at home or, relaxing or driving even maybe. Or if it's a long haul trip, maybe you do want them to be really high energy.
Do you, I think that's an amazing frame, and I've never thought about that. When you're writing songs, it sounds like you do this where you think about what your listener, your imaginary theoretical listener, what they're doing as they're listening to your song that you're making. Do you think about this person is driving down the coastline or working out, or does that come to mind?
Not all the time, but I definitely have started kind of thinking in that frame of mind, just because I think it gives you a little bit more intention behind what you're working on. A lot of my earlier albums probably were all over the map with regards to style and feeling, and that can be a little schizophrenic for a listener. You can be really into a groove, or it can be a low tempo thing, and then all of a sudden some really noisy thing comes on. Maybe that's not the best way to go, especially if it's not your intention. But starting for Ronchamp, it's starting with a very hazy, misty memory and trying to extrapolate as much as you can out of it. I really want to make sure that people can get the feeling of my experience in an instrumental album.
Right, and I think that's incredible. I know we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show, but I think it's just incredible that you've got this beautiful experience in your mind and in your memory, and you're going to try to build based only on that. I think that's such a cool and just a novel concept. I've talked to a lot of people about their records and their projects, but not many people have told me they're going to build it entirely based on a memory. Mm-hmm. So I think it's super cool. So I wanted to go back a little bit just in terms of your musical history, and I always like to know about like the first few years of someone's musical career. Do you remember, I'm sure you were young when you started, but do you remember what initially drew you to music?
Ooh, yes, I guess I do. Like many people playing the piano, I started when I was a kid, like 5 or 6 years old. But I played for the whole time, up all the way through high school. I didn't really enjoy it or for myself until I got into high school. So all before that point was just playing to learn a piece, to do a recital, and then you kind of move on, right? It's just lessons.
I did
it's
something
just
very
class.
similar. My parents forced me into piano when I was like 5, so I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of us are in that boat.
Oh, yes, you hear this story a lot. But then when I got to high school, I started playing as the accompanist for the choir. And I started seeing that there was an actual application I could use to not just learn songs, but then actually perform them, be part of a group or an ensemble. And so from there, I started then being in the choir and then playing for the musical, then being in the musical. So there was this kind of point around 14 or so where I was like, oh, this isn't just to learn a piece and then to play it to get a grade from a teacher. Now I can actually say like, oh, I could be in jazz band, or I can play this song and everyone will sing along with it. Right. So it really kind of started there for me.
And I imagine it got a lot more fun at that point.
Yeah.
Once you start to realize like, oh, I'm part of this larger whole, and collectively we make this really awesome thing. Not that a piano concerto can't be cool, but like,
right.
It is. There's a limit to what one can do by themselves.
And it's a great way to get dates for the dance. Because
yes.
Everyone likes to, you're showing your skills off in front of people, and they're like, oh, he's interesting. And then later they find out I'm not very interesting. But at that moment, that's all you need to get in for the dance.
You're very interesting, Josh. I'm sure back then, now you are.
We'll see.
I'm sure you were killing it back then, killing it now.
I did all right.
Just running game with your musical chops. Love it.
It's hey. Musical time is good for that thing. I think in every level of that, you're in close quarters with people for a long period of time. You're doing something. Everyone's got to be part of the same team. So of course you like make good friends and boyfriends, girlfriends, all sorts of stuff through music.
Enemies, friends.
Yeah, some enemies.
Lovers, just the whole spectrum of relationship. And how did? Obviously, you do an amazing job playing synth and under Moonlight. Like, where did synth come in the timeline of your musical kind of journey, and like what drew you to synth?
Probably that so many are keyboard based, and I had an in with piano. I don't think I really ever had a synth, like an external, not in the box, computer synth until maybe 2001, 2002. That would have been the Micro Korg. And I don't even really think I knew how to use it very well until maybe like 4 years ago. But I think I always wanted to have lots of instrumentation, very full songs, lots of layers. And through maybe 96, kind of when I started writing music, to 2002, all of that was whatever the best version of a MIDI instrument was, whether it was the MIDI instrument in the computer or whether it was like a Rompler kind of instrument box that just had sounds in it. And I always wanted to just do more and more, but there is a kind of point when you're in the box where you stop wanting to feel, it kind of feels inauthentic, even if it's synth sounds. It feels like you're not playing a synth, it feels like you're playing a piano that's playing MIDI notes, or you're drawing MIDI notes, you're drawing a drum beat in the computer. So for me, I just kind of always wanted to collect instruments and play them as they are, and manage the sounds that are inherent in the instrument versus using whatever I could. Now you can use any instrument in the world in your computer, but there's a point at which it doesn't feel, for me, authentic.
Yeah, and that is, I think, a really important part of songwriting and production is like it needs to feel to you, and it's all relative, but it needs to feel organic to you, because in the end that's what's going to inspire you. Like if it feels plasticky and fake to you, you're probably going to resist it, and you're not going to feel relaxed, and you're not going to produce your best work and best ideas. It should just feel natural and organic, and like an extension of you as just a creator versus like this artificial thing.
I always feel like a fraud playing drums on a piano, right?
Yeah.
You can play things in a way that a normal drummer can't play. You're maybe just falling into habits of how your hands move on a keyboard versus how they would move if you're actually playing even a synth drum or a real drum kit that you've mic'd.
Right.
So for me, a lot of that, like same with guitar, it's like, no, I have not heard a good synth guitar sound really that like speaks to me. It's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I think you have to do a lot of work to get a good fake guitar. Guitar just, has a vibe to it, has a playability to it that is not in the computer.
Totally.
So
the dynamics aren't out there. Yeah.
Just the technique, the way, and you can create a VST that allows you to tweak every single aspect of a performance, but at that point you're just programming, you're not playing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. What do you, it seems like you liked the Marg. What do you think of the Marg,
I did
man?
like the Margarita, it was very good.
Yours is empty, so I'm going to assume yes, you dug it.
I will drink any drink that's in front of me, but it's summertime in Chicago, I've been trying to, get into margaritas, mixing at home.
Yeah.
And so yeah, you did a good job.
Good, man, thank you. I'm glad. Not to toot my own horn, but I used to bartend back in the day, especially like, 21, 22-ish, and I made margaritas all day long because I worked at a lot of like various restaurants that were like family restaurants. So you end up making a billion margaritas. So I just feel like after so much time, you learn like the principles of good margs. You just like, you need a good base tequila. I use a reposado. You need to use Contro. Don't use triple sec.
Okay, see,
like,
that's the thing. People are like, oh, you can use triple sec, and I end up,
triple
not
sec is
really.
terrible. No, don't do it.
That's hilarious.
That's always, I know everyone's always like use triple sec, or that's like the default whatever recommendation, and I think it's because it's cheaper, but
Sure.
definitely use Contro. I also think, and this is kind of obvious, but like you need to use real limes, and like most people, especially just most restaurants, they use like mixes, like pre-made
sour
mixes
mix
from whatever,
yeah.
from Jewel. Most people do the same thing. They just like dump this thing from Jewel into their glass, and it's just terrible. And so you need to do it real. You need to squeeze actual limes and then put the juice into your little, cocktail shaker. And
I think that's
do
the
it old
trick,
school.
though. I mean, kind of dovetailing into the inauthenticity aspect of it. It's like, you do what's easy
Right.
or familiar. So a
Right.
lot of times, I mean, I've kind of found when I started trying to make my own that I'm like, there's something, I don't know if I'm hitting on the right flavor, but I'm like, it's probably because I was drinking some sour mix or something, and I'm trying to encapsulate a flavor that's essentially fake.
Right.
So, getting into the authentic side of things is
Yeah.
much more rewarding.
I love how you somehow tied music,
That's all I think about.
the artisanal aspect of music with the artisanal aspect of making drinks. That's brilliant and beautiful.
Ingredients, proportions, crafts.
It is all the same. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess it is an art form, like any art form, and the principles of art. As you get into different mediums, you realize the principles of art are the same no matter what
Sure.
medium you're working with.
I mean, I went to school for architecture, so
Right.
that is where I didn't want to become an architect after I graduated, but I did learn so much about photography and typefaces and graphic design and model building that like you really understand that how all those things are connected.
Yeah.
So yeah, a good art education. Even though I didn't know anyone that did music, and I feel sometimes I suffered for it because I was never in a band until I moved to Chicago.
Yeah.
And all that sort of stuff. So it's like I could have been doing more music, but I wouldn't. I wouldn't have done it. I was doing architecture. That's what it was.
And it came in the right time. It came when you were ready for
Right.
it to happen, and like you had to be ready for it.
Everyone makes the best choice they can at the time they're making it.
So I'm curious and fascinated about this new project, Ronchamp. I know the broad strokes of it, and I think it's, again, fascinating, but I think it's probably 1,000 times better if you describe it, like your vision for it. I could do it, but I feel like if you want to
Sure.
kind of walk through your vision for what this record will be.
Yeah. So during architecture school, my program was such that it was a 6-year program that involved 4 years of school, 2 years of internships, and kind of alternated back and forth. So you could trade off one internship quarter for a travel quarter, and you can go study things. You have to kind of pitch your idea to your advisor about what you're looking to do on your trip, that sort of thing. So I had planned a trip with my then girlfriend and her roommate to go to Europe for 10 and a half weeks. And we planned the trip, it was all working out, then she broke up with me, but we still decided to go on the trip together, which was a smooth move on my part.
Probably a little rocky.
Travel around for 10 weeks with your ex, it's great. So we went all over Europe and checked different architectural sites out. And one thing that I really wanted to see was this chapel by Le Corbusier. It's called Notre Dame Du Haut, and it's in this small town of Ronchamp. So it's kind of difficult to get there, especially during the off season. And you have to take a train, get off the train, and then usually you could take a bus up to the chapel and see it. This was the off season. It was not the pilgrimage time, so no buses running at all. So we got into town, figured out how do we get up there. Basically found a cabbie that we had enough money to hire for an hour. So he drove us up to the chapel, and then we had about 20 minutes to spend checking it out before we had to get back in the thing and get there before the hour was up and we couldn't pay him anymore.
Sure.
So it was a very brief moment, but it was, in a way, super special because of that. So I didn't have a chance to take photography. I didn't have a chance to sit down and sketch. I only had a chance to go and see the building, experience the building for itself. And it was kind of, it was a real kind of sea change moment for me with regards to architecture. I really hadn't thought much about like brutalism and Le Corbusier because you're very used to seeing these buildings in black and white in slides or in tiny little pictures in an art history book or something like that. So actually being in the space and being able to see like what the point of it was really engaging, and it definitely left an impression on me. So when trying to figure out what I wanted to do next musically, I was like, I really want to try to take this memory that's now 20 years old and see if I can encapsulate it in a musical project. So the idea is probably a 40-minute or so album, all instrumental, that is my memory of coming to the town, driving up to the space, experiencing the space, and then leaving the space.
Interesting. So I didn't even know that part where it's not even just the experience within Notre Dame Du Haut, but it's also the journey up to it, the journey away from it, and just like the full progression of kind of the climax, and you kind of like get to walk down the mountain, if you will, as well. Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's important, especially because if my memory serves me, and I can't really figure out if that's true or not. He was listening to a French version of Britney Spears in the cab. So I feel like that's part of the memory in some way. It's like this kind of, very mundane thing that did it take away from the very somewhat spiritual aspect of the experience? I don't think it did. It definitely kind of added to that little bit of flavor to the memory. And it leaves a musical impression that maybe wasn't there for anyone else but me.
What do you think, like on an emotional level, emotional, spiritual, however you want to take it, because I don't know your exact beliefs, but what do you think was so transformative about the experience for you, just like on like a more personal human level as you were walking through the kind of architecture? And I'm just curious like how it spoke to you on a more foundational human, emotional, kind of spiritual level, however you want to take it.
Yeah, I would say spiritual in like kind of the worldly sense. I don't have any specific religious affiliation with regards to that chapel, but you learn, you see a picture of a building, you learn what the architect intended. Oh, this weight is supposed to reference this, or the windows inside are very small, but they're filled with stained glass, so it's very dark, but has these, beams of colored light. And you're like, cool, that's great, I get it, right? Mm-hmm. You think you get it, but then when you're there and you're walking under this giant, like swooping concrete canopy into this like narrow entry, and then you go into this dark room where there is just these shafts of colored light. You're like, I understand it now. So it really is a difference between just learning about something and truly experiencing it for what it was intended. And there's certain buildings, I think, that have the ability to have anyone that walks in experience, whether they understand architecture or they know who designed it or anything like that. I think here in Chicago, we're very lucky to have a lot of those types of buildings.
We are an architectural capital.
Yeah, but you can walk into a Frank Lloyd Wright house and you can understand why it's designed a certain way, because everything is designed on the human scale. Everything is designed to be lived in, so you kind of really get the feeling of it, even if you aren't thinking about it academically. Mm-hmm. Same with like the Monadnock building downtown, which is this giant, it's like department store kind of shops on the ground floor, offices above, but it was one of the tallest buildings at the time, blocked out the sun from lots of buildings north of it and cause a huge problem at the time. But you can still go down there right now and feel the weight of that. You can feel how heavy the building is, how solid it is, and you can kind of understand that this was a significant thing for the city at the time.
Yeah, I was actually there a couple weeks ago. I was just walking
really?
by. I happened to be at ironically, a cocktail bar. But I was walking by that building, and I was just struck by its beauty. And to your point, I mean, what's I think so great about all wonderful pieces of art, or all great pieces of art, have something in common in that you can appreciate them on an academic level, on a theoretical level, as you're saying. For someone who's like an architectural kind of nerd, they can nerd out about those certain pieces. But
Right.
if you're just a human who just lives on the earth, you can just enjoy it just for the sake of like beauty for its own sake, if
Yeah.
you will. And you can just enjoy being in this space. And I don't, admittedly, I don't know that much about architecture, but I do connect a lot with certain spaces because they make me feel a certain thing.
Right.
And so I just think every great piece of art, particularly architecture, is going to be able to, whatever level you want to connect on, it will allow you to connect on that level.
Right. And I think it's interesting to be also in a city where you could, because you see something so often, maybe you get bored by it, or you don't get to see it freshly from someone's eyes unless you're a tourist in a place.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder about that with regards to Ronchamp. Are the people there like, oh yeah, there's the chapel up there. Everyone comes to see the chapel, no big deal. But you really can't worry about that. You just have to have your experience be your experience. And similarly with music, I try not to worry about too much about what the end product is going to be commercially, or whether I'm going to perform it or not. I do want to try to perform it with this one, but at the end of the day, the piece has to be the piece. It has to be what it is about, and I hope that I can feel successful, that I've created something that I feel successful with. And whether anyone else cares is their business, not mine.
Right. Yeah, I mean, what? And that's a great point, and I'm curious your perspective, because every artist has different definitions of success. So like, what at this point in your career, what is artistic success for you?
That is a good question, a very good question, because sometimes when I'm feeling like, what am I doing, I remind myself of the things I've been able to do, and I think, well, if I had a checklist of what I've been able to do in music, I have almost checked every box.
That's amazing.
I know, it's crazy. I've produced a vinyl record. I've played at an outdoor festival. I've written music for film and stage. I've licensed a song for a movie. All these kind of things. If I check the list down, it's like, I didn't license a song for like Transformers, or I'm not writing music for like the biggest name. I'm not like,
Yeah, you're not writing like a James Bond theme song
right,
necessarily
right,
yet, but
But I mean, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, at this point, I want to try to increase my deliberateness with regards to composing. So a lot of times, a lot of my work is very just fluid. I'll improvise something and build off of that, and just call it what it is. And if it felt right, I'm done with it. And just move on. But specifically with this one, I really want to try to compose it. I want to be able to write. If I was to make sheet music of it, I want to be able to do that. I don't know if I will do that, but I want to write something that could be made into sheet music, if that makes sense. A lot of times with synths and pads, you're like doing all sorts of like swoopy things, and maybe it's intentional, maybe it's an accident, and you're like, ooh, that accident sounded great, I'm just going to use that. So I'm trying to not do that for this, because this is probably the first time that I really, composed something for the composition's sake.
Going back to your discussions around, or your kind of architectural history, was Chicago's architecture one of the reasons you came here?
Yeah. My parents moved here my dad was in the Army, and his last assignment was heading up the ROTC department at UIC. So they were living here, they enjoyed it, and then I came up for an architectural field trip, like around 99 or so, and just pretty much fell in love with the city and never wanted to leave. I knew this was like the place I wanted to be. And I lived a lot of
It
places.
does have that effect on people where they just come for a little while and then suddenly they're like, wow, this city is amazing. I'm just going to stay here for till I'm dead. So I'm wondering about, as I've said, I think I love this idea of building from memory, building from perception. I think it's a fascinating concept. Do you have, or I should say, how have you transformed and transmitted feelings, perceptions, memories into musical parts? Like, I'm just curious how that works. As a songwriter, as a musician, I have done that to a degree, but it's still kind of new to me. So I'm just curious how, in your mind, you've tried to translate a relatively, subjective, relative thing into your own kind of musical parts.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm still working out a little bit of that part of it. I definitely am the most naturally emotive on the piano, but I feel like there may be an element of kind of the Peter and the Wolf aspect of things where I can, say, oh, what instrument sounds heavy? What sounds oppressive versus light, and maybe play into that a little bit.
Like musical symbolism is what I would call
sure,
it.
Yeah. I would say that's definitely an aspect I want to go with in a certain stance. It's tough to find the balance and try to find an instrument that maybe universally seems heavy or light or aggressive or timid, those types of things, without going into the tropes of what people expect. So kind of working that out a little bit, but starting with melodies. I think melodies and pacing for me are things that will kind of lead into the feeling and the feelings of the memories more than anything.
That makes sense. And do you have a feeling or feelings or moods that you hope people will experience when this record is done? And I should note that I've had the pleasure to hear the early kind of demos and recordings and sketches, and I think it's amazing, man.
Thank you.
Really, I've heard quite a bit of what you've done, and I'm really liking what's kind of the early chapters of this project. But do you have visions of how you want people to feel, or the experiences you want people to have for this record?
Yeah, I think I do. I've tried to take the approach of starting from just trying to program out the actual physical time frame, approaching, being in the space, leaving the space in a general sense, and then I've started to sculpt the textures and the feelings there. I think the next thing I want to do in the kind of will be like the third phase and hopefully final phase of it is to maybe I've tried to do this without writing down my actual literal memories. I'm trying to keep it as ephemeral as I can.
Interesting.
But I might try to really kind of hone in on a couple visual details that I experienced while I was there, and see if I can maybe translate that into instrumentation while I develop these final melodies. So I definitely have things I want people to understand about the thing I described earlier with maybe having this heavy canopy over top of you, coming into a very compressed entrance and then an expansive opening once you come into the space. There's definitely a way to do that, and is it tempo? Is it volume? Is it pitch? There's kind of those elements, what brush am I going to be painting with ultimately with regards to that? So I'm kind of sussing that out.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful thing, Matt, that you're going to try to, this idea of openness and how do you create something that's musically open. I think that's a fascinating thing. I've always loved the idea of musical symbolism, and I'm excited to see where you ultimately the decisions that you make. I've seen the early drafts and kind of the rough sketches, and I'm sure you'll kind of do the finer strokes over time.
Yeah, there's definitely parts of what you've heard that won't make it into the final cut.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes from that improvisational thing where I'm like, okay, I liked what I was doing at the time, but thinking about it analytically, going back and editing, and being critical of your own work, that probably doesn't fit the feeling. Maybe I'll kind of either massage it, change an instrument. There's one part of it that sounds specifically kind of Asian, and I don't I mean, obviously this is in France and it has nothing to do with that, and that's not my feeling, but it's maybe just the tone of the synth. It gives a specific kind of vibe that maybe sounds like a koto or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, that doesn't really represent what this feeling is, so I kind of need to go back and revise that.
Interesting. And so I guess the ultimate question, as we kind of get to the wrap, is when can we expect the record, Josh? I'm excited about it, and I'm only hearing the early drafts, but when can we expect this baby to be out?
My goal is spring of 22.
Okay.
So we're here in almost July. If I can get everything together and get it to a place where I feel good about it in September, October, the goal is to press it for vinyl, and then I'm at the whim of the vinyl gods. And it's all about the queue. So we'll see if things work out in my favor and I can get it done for, like, I like to play in April and May. So if I could figure out how to perform this in May of 22, I'd be very happy.
I look forward to seeing the show in May of 22, and hopefully,
Awesome.
The world has healed. Hopefully,
I think we're there. I think we're getting there. We're not there,
think
but
so
we're getting
too.
there.
I wanted to end with one last question. This is kind of a quiet hour hallmark or signature, if you will. So
All right.
I'm curious about, of all the moments in your career musically, which moment are you the most grateful for? Which moment do you most cherish?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's
It
been a
is hard.
while.
Yeah, it's hard. And
Out
I
of
know
25 years, honestly, I'm gonna say my record release in March of 2020, right? So it was 2 weeks before everything shut down. I came out with an album that I'm super proud of and very happy with, and I got to play it 2 times before everything shut down. And the first time was just a really great outpouring of support from people. It was in a record store that I love here in Chicago.
I happen to be there.
You were there, that's true. I had relatives that, drove in from Ohio to come and see it, and it was just like, oh, I feel, it's always nice when you feel like what you've put all of your emotional energy into gets some sort of reception, recognition, support. Because if from working on anything artistic, you put a lot of yourself into it, and when it's done, there's this like hole, right? You've poured yourself into this one little point, and now you're like, what's next? What am I going to do? Does anyone care? And it's like, the does anyone care thing vacillates. Sometimes it's like, oh, people are really into this, and some people, sometimes like, I worked really hard and it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I know that.
Everyone knows it. Even
Yeah.
like, I'll see like Takashi Murakami will talk about that. He's an amazing, successful artist, and he'll be like, nobody cares about my work. So yeah, that was great. It was like March 7th, I think, 2020 was really a pinnacle for me, and hopefully the next thing will be the next pinnacle.